It's Jim Paff, and welcome back to the Against Nice podcast, where we believe that nice people are the cruelest of all people because they're subjective and selfish in the way that they address society. Kind people have the interests of others in mind, but they speak truth into society. Follow us on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and also give us your review of the podcast. You can also follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many other podcasting apps. Now let's get to the show. Looked forward to this interview with Austin Peterson. He's a former Libertarian Party presidential candidate back in 2016, and he joined the Republican Party to run against Josh Hawley in the Senate race in Missouri in 2018. He was unsuccessful there, put up a good run. Now he's a radio talk show host in Jefferson City, Missouri. Solid libertarian. Really interesting conversation. Be prepared because we have an interesting exchange related to my discussion, or at least that I began, about getting libertarian fiscal conservative ideas into the Christian community, and that's a real interesting exchange. You're going to want to hear that. I don't want to give it away here, but stick in for that. You're going to find that interesting. But we had a great conversation. He's a solid when it comes to these basic issues of liberty, and he remains a great proponent of it. He's really trying to think through whether he's going to vote for Donald Trump, even though he's said he's leaning that way, and he gets a lot of criticism for it. So without further ado, let's have our conversation with Austin Peterson. Well, welcome, everybody. Really excited to have Austin Peterson. Well, not often I have a former presidential candidate on the podcast, but Austin Peterson is the former Libertarian Party presidential candidate. He's former GOP U.S. Senate candidate in Missouri, and he also was an associate producer on Judge Napolitano's Freedom Watch, and love Judge Nap. Austin, you know, I worked for Thomas Massie as his chief of staff, and he says Thomas is his favorite congressman for good reason. He's owner of the Libertarian Republic news magazine and French Bulldog, and a new website, FrenchieBS.com. Got to find out about that. But Austin, welcome to the Against Nice podcast.
Hey, thanks so much. So a little bit of not-for-profits. No, I'm here. Can you hear me? Mic check, mic check.
Oh, hold on a second. Sorry. Do I hear you?
Mic check, mic check, mic check.
I wonder if I messed that up. Let me start over. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I hear you now. I think my background recording device, I think, pulled you out. That's why.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so I'm just going to do it straight Zoom. Okay, 3. Second time, 3, 2, 1. Well, glad to have Austin Peterson on the podcast. Not often I get to have a former presidential candidate on. He's the Libertarian Party presidential candidate back in 2016. He's a former has moved to the Republican Party. He was a U.S. Senate candidate against Josh Hawley in Missouri. Former associate producer of Judge Napolitano's Freedom Watch, whom we love, as Thomas Massie's former chief of staff. He calls Thomas his favorite congressman for good reason. And owner of the Libertarian Republic news magazine. He's owner of French Bulldog and a new website, FrenchieBS.com. I'm going to be interested to hear about that. But Austin, welcome to the Against Nice podcast.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to meet you, Jim.
Yeah, good to meet you too. I'm surprised we haven't run into each other.
Yeah, me too.
I think we've been running parallel paths for a little bit of time. Now, I've been kind of out in the you're kind of now into the GOP after having been in the Libertarian Party. I've been kind of running in those trenches for way too long, since the 1990s as a libertarian. And I think a lot of people were surprised when I called myself a Christian libertarian. They didn't know how to process that. But I think we've really got a situation in this country where I've long before either of us got involved in politics, where we've lost the ideas of our Constitution. In fact, Thomas Massie always would say to people, he didn't he identified as a libertarian, but he tried to say I'm a constitutionalist. And I think we've lost a sense of that in this country. And you kind of jumped into this at sort of a young age, wanting to run for president. Something really sparked you. What's behind all that? How did you even get involved in politics, and why?
That's funny you asked that. So to really go back to how I got started, I read Ayn Rand and was interested in the ideas of economic freedom. And I think my social views were always very laissez-faire, tolerant, and just very unconcerned about what people do with their private lives, provided they harm no one else, kind of a deal. Like I'm a very mind my own business type of a person. And so I think when I was, late 20s, I started, I was living in New York City as an actor, writer, producer, basically just getting my career started out of college. And I volunteered for Ron Paul, produced videos for him, and was, very successful with that. I got a job working for the Libertarian Party in 2008 because, I did some activist work for them when they contacted me back in the early days of social media, when people were still kind of figuring out, how to use that for political purposes. And Ron Paul was doing money bombs of millions and millions of dollars a day, and people like myself were out there organizing to support those efforts, just because I identified, being a young New Yorker at the time, even though I'm originally from Missouri, where I live now.
Yeah.
But I identified with those ideas of social tolerance. And I think that I always believed that the Constitution provided a framework so that, Christian libertarians such as yourself or agnostic libertarians like myself could have completely different worldviews, but the Constitution provides a framework for people like ourselves to exist. And I think that, our opposition are the people who don't agree with us that the Constitution fundamentally protects the diversity that they claim to be in favor of, but they don't actually support throughout their, their highly centralized socialistic policies. And of course, a big problem is the fact that in terms of dialogue, we are all talking past one another in this country. And so the only real conversations happening are on podcasts like this and Joe Rogan.
I was listening to some of your previous podcasts as I was just getting ready for this, and you had one that said conservatism is socialism for white people, which I have a really hard time disagreeing with. For my political career, I've been doing politics like full-time or part-time for pay for, more than 30 years now. And I was willing to identify with the moniker conservative in a general sense because of the conserve aspect of it. Although there was a great organization in Indiana called the Indiana Policy Review, which Mike Pence actually once ran, that called itself a journal of liberal opinion. And you have to really understand the terminology. But, conservative, you kind of accept it a little bit because it's fundamentally the way people understand the term that probably applies for a lot of people. But it really, and more as time has gone on since then, causes a lot of confusion. I think, it's one thing to want to conserve certain things about society. It's another thing to adhere to basic principles. And I think people need to call themselves constitutionalists if they come from our more libertarian mindset here, not mindset, but ideology.
Can I interject on that and say, one of my good friends kind of came up with a sort of a brilliant formulation of this thought is like, what if you're a conservative, what are you conserving? And, consider the size of government that we have today, right? If you're a conservative based on the size of the government that we have today, well, that means that, if the government gets any bigger, then you'll be for what? Returning it to what we have today. Like the government is already too big as it is today. And are you a conservative that does what Ronald Reagan did, for example? And Ronald Reagan, in his speech, A Time for Choosing, in his defense of Barry Goldwater, was a full-throated endorsement of big major New Deal programs, things like Social Security and others, that it was a conservative endorsement. It was to say that, this system's broken and, maybe we don't agree with it, but we're going to fight to maintain this institution in our society because it's an important institution the American people have all agreed on. And if conservatism is about conserving government as it is, well, they've done a very good job of that.
Right.
The job of progressives is to grow government, and the job of conservatives is to grow government a little more slowly, is what I understand.
Or in a way we prefer.
Right. Or in a way, exactly. As long as government's doing what we want it to do, the new conservatism today, don't get me started on it. It's kind of a strange mix of the old breed of paleo-conservatism mixed with a sort of like new toxic, youth movement online that, apparently got very bored of it very quickly. But, libertarians like ourselves plodding along, throughout the decades, the George Wills, the Murray Rothbards, the Leonard Reeds, the Henry Hazlitt's, the Frederick Bastiats, the unseen, unspoken minority, that very, very rarely has a platform to address their nation states about the state of affairs. And sadly we are in a scenario where even online voices are squelched out. We mentioned Joe Rogan. He's taking on this new platform on Spotify. Well, certain episodes of his are missing, and very soon people like ourselves will just disappear. No PayPal for you, no monetization of your YouTube videos, no, because that's how people like ourselves have a voice and can speak. And, so while, Josh Hawley and others, we criticize them, these new conservatives, for their approaches of we want government to do what we want to do for ourselves, it can be very hard to argue against them when they say they're coming for you, that the social media, the private companies that you defend to the last man, they're coming for the Jim Pfaff podcast. They're coming for, the Austin Peterson Freedom Report. They are coming for us. And that's a difficult position to argue against, Jim.
Well, I tell you what, this is a really big Section 230, which in part was intended to give these online platforms a bit of freedom to allow a variety of voices, is now kind of getting turned on its head. This is going to be a big discussion in the libertarian movement and the freedom movement right now, because on one hand, I think it's really absurd to throw more regulation on this whole concept, while at the same time these companies are taking advantage of it. And you're seeing little movements to try to provide competing platforms, but there's a long way to go before there's that kind of independence there. I think there's a real attack.
What I've noticed, and this is just from a tactical perspective, is just that libertarians, we're losing on so many fronts. And I think this one, while we have the high ground at the moment with this Section 230, I do believe, if the conservatives who are in power right now get their way, which they are on the cusp of doing, then, these social media platforms, I think, will actually have reason to be more censorious, of voices that, are dangerous, or what they seem as, militant or what have you. But the problem, I think, with us libertarians tactically is that we don't even consider that the other side might have a good point. So we dismiss the attitudes and opinions of the people who disagree with us on this issue, where conservatives are raising sincere concerns, but that sometimes, like, people from our camp will be dismissive towards those concerns, right? Rather than to acknowledge that that is a sincere concern. Because for God's sakes, what libertarian isn't a podcaster or YouTubing or doing, what we're doing right now or something like that, right? So my hold on the mainstream media personally is tenuous, saying that I have a mainstream media show, but I mean, like, the left, and people, of course, who, don't want me to succeed are going to do everything they can so that I don't get anywhere near, advancing, have a bigger voice, bigger market, get syndication, to take this message and make this mainstream. There's a lot of people who don't want to, these ideas out there. Trust me.
No, absolutely.
But how do we get to the mainstream? Here's the thing, to wrap this up. How could I have even gotten my toehold into the mainstream like I have right now, working at Fox Business, working at, KWOS where I work now, no way I could have done it if the internet wasn't there. And Facebook, social media, how I, organized for Ron Paul. If the rules that are even in place now, hadn't existed back then, I don't even know if I'd be where I'm at right now. So, I mean, like it's dangerous to be a young libertarian punk on the streets trying to bring about a revolution.
No, yeah, absolutely. But I really have a lot of hope. Now, I've been national advisor for Young Americans for Liberty. Cliff Maloney's a great friend.
Great group. Yeah.
They're doing an excellent job there. Justin Grice, those guys, they're fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And so it gives me hope in the long term, because to be candid, what they're doing is substantively changing the debate on college campuses. I remember fighting on college campuses in the mid 80s when I went to Indiana University, and I was, you're just kind of you felt a little bit in the woods. But I'm seeing these kids on college campuses that hold conservatives or libertarian-minded young kids that are just trying to break through the system there. I think it's harder for them by far today than it was for me in the mid-'80s. And so, but these kids are learning not only to be courageous in their opinions and to share them in an exciting way with their peers, their courage goes into really digging into it. And I think, as bad as the college campuses are right now, there are kids there that are really making a difference and causing their peers to think through where they're really coming from.
I have nothing but nice things to say about Young Americans for Liberty. I was in the room in the old broken down college off-campus living situation that it was Ron Paul, students for Ron Paul.
Yeah.
Now I was in the room when Jeff Frazee and a bunch of other people signed the charter to change it to Young Americans for Liberty from Students for Ron Paul. So I've seen that institution grow and take on, new responsibilities and change their mission towards what I think is probably a very, very astute strategy, which is to go after these winnable state races, and they get in there and they get these people, trained up to be the next Ron Paul, to be the next, to be the next Thomas Massey and stuff. So I think that's a really legitimate strategy that they've embarked on, and they definitely own that space. And they need more money because, frankly, right now, the Trump groups, right, the Students for Trump and different things like that, those people, like, they've got so much money and resources. For example, Turning Point USA, right? So they have the resources to be affecting change every single day. What I'm hoping is that, and I know they've got some big sponsors, but what I'm hoping is that, they're really somebody's going to invest in them in a big way so that they can, be even more, not to necessarily overshadow what the conservative groups are doing, but to be at least as influential in the shaping of ideas. Because, like, if you got to get these people while they're young, because when they get older, their minds are made up.
No, there's no doubt about it. I was running the woods as a young kid in this, and it was always very tough. And there are some things that Turning Point USA do that are net benefit. But you're right. I think we have a real opportunity with young people who are passionate about freedom. I mean, they want to be able to do what they want to do. And to do that in an organized way, in a bigger way, would be fantastic. You're right. There's a lot of work, but it's also spawned some really cool and interesting other organizations. So Ed King, that was involved with Young Americans for Liberty for a long time, now running Defense Priorities, which is actually getting regular play even on conservative-minded Fox News, where and Trump has really helped this by kind of calling out the war machine that we've had in this country. So I have hope. There are some things that are happening that are useful there. I think I still somewhat, maybe I'm just, I don't know, bleary-eyed about it. I still kind of think there's a core of freedom that is in this country that we can really build on if we really work hard at it.
No matter how you feel about the coronavirus issue, I think that left or right on the spectrum, that people have been outraged by the overreach of our governments. And it's one thing to be critical of the president and the federal Congress and all that stuff. because their blunders are usually, bigger on the radar. But when it's your mayor of your town who's canceling Halloween, and then liberals are going to scream and be mad about that. Left liberals are not going to be happy about, their favorite holiday, Hail Satan, being canceled. Just kidding. But it's
hey, wait, you're agnostic. You're not supposed to be bought into that kind of stuff.
Not gonna lie. It's my favorite holiday too. But I'd be mad. You know what I mean? As a Republican, Libertarian Republican, I'd be mad. Those kinds of things. I think that the tyranny that we've seen, like, a surfer out in the ocean, paddleboarder gets arrested by cops, and these stories, I think, have probably brought out I'll say liberal in quotes, the true liberal, right? The liberal in many people. And I've seen that just kind of organically. I've seen people on social media who I know very well would institute Marxist, state if they could vote for socialism immediately. Would they do it? They absolutely would. No idea what the hell it is, but they would vote for that. Because
yeah.
But I have seen people like that post stories about stupid, crazy government overreach that has made your blood boil. I've seen conservatives who love the flag, stand for the flag. If they hear the national anthem in a movie, they'll stand up in the theater and salute,
Yeah.
But the police, when they started shutting down the churches, that was the first time I started seeing, and then a lot of national figures too, conservatively, tweeting things like, hey, cops, you remember you work for us, and the left is not your friend. We are, and you should remember who is on your side. And I remember seeing those tweets and thinking to myself, here we have this patriotic conservative person who, has the blue, every single thing. Like, they don't know. I mean, you could give them 20 different flavors of boot polish and they could tell you which factory it was sourced from. They love it so much. They love authority so much.
Yeah.
But those people, after their churches were shut down, after their First Amendment rights were essentially abolished, and overnight and immediately, how dare you show up and gather, peaceably assemble at your place of worship and cast your prayers to your God, possibly for the last time during a pandemic, we might add.
Churches are closing. Some of them are closing.
Yeah, even the outdoor ceremonies, the ones where people would drive by, they would come in and harass them and stuff like that. So, maybe if those people threw out a few jars of boot polish over this, then I say it's a victory.
No, it is a net victory. Listen, my concern, I worked at Focus on the Family, man. I believe in protecting the unborn. I know you've come out as pro-life. Judge Napolitano has said that. I mean, it's such an obvious libertarian thing to me. By the way, quick tangent. Democrats, when they say pro-choice, I'm like, no, you're pro-abortion. You're wanting the baby mill killing thing to go on. Libertarians that are not pro-life, at least I can say to them they're pro-choice because they probably thought about it, but I disagree with them.
Very true. And I also love it when those libertarians like to lecture me about non-aggression.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, really. I mean, seriously. And I by the way, you have hope in this area because kids now, I mean, all their brothers and sisters' ultrasounds are on the stinking refrigerator. I think we've got a real change there, but that's a fundamental liberty issue. Religious liberty is an obvious issue. I don't care if you're a Ayn Rand objectivist. If you are principled, you understand that kind of liberty must be maintained. But here's my concern. See, because I had a Christian recently when I was promoting some libertarian ideal on Facebook. I can't remember what it was, but they came back and they were pounding on libertarians because, Ayn Rand is there, blah, blah, blah. And she hated philanthropy and she hated God and all this kind of stuff. But these same people that are worried about Ayn Rand Ayn Rand objectivism. By the way, they probably couldn't use the term, but they're worried about that. They're just as much trying to comply with all this stuff. They're talking about Jesus being a socialist, this kind of thing. There's a real disconnect in areas where it should be just the opposite. The biblical ethic is libertarian. I mean, all you got to do is read 1 Samuel 8,
I hate to cut you off and interject on this, and I'm just going to say it's like, that's a fight that you guys are going to have to fight internally. And I wish you well on that one, but man, is that ever a losing argument? I think over the total. Rush Limbaugh was freaking out this morning. I was listening to him. He does a little 2-minute thing for my broadcast. Right. And it was about the rise of atheism in the United States. And he was, talking about how it was talking about it in a way that it was so like inextricably linked to leftism, right? Which is kind of like, to assume that is also assume that like Christianity is, inextricably linked with conservatism. And, maybe that is true to a degree, but I mean, even the Pope is pretty freaking liberal. I mean,
he's a radical leftist.
Yeah. Again, not my circus, not my monkeys, but I mean, I feel bad for my Christian libertarian friends because I feel like we're losing on so many other things. And it's like people believe Jesus is a socialist. I mean, it's just too easy because of all the passages. And then it's like, once you get into like the biblical question of it, it's like you're fighting with other Christians, and it's like people like myself and the rest of society largely, who are becoming more and more non-religious are like left out of it. And it becomes more of a small squabble rather than like, world global impacting events. I know that it is that to that community, but to the rest of it, it's kind of like, hey, can we talk about policy now? Because who cares if Jesus was a socialist? Not me. I mean, most people who formulate policy, even the people who say they're Christians, they're not sitting out there debating that, you know what I mean? But I know it's of endless interest to the people in the Abrahamic faith. So I hope I didn't offend. I just
no, you don't offend at all. I think
annoyed by it.
No. I think it's a relevant question. I had this discussion with Andy Breitbart years back, who, agnostic as he was as well too, felt that he needed to protect Christians because they were just too nice about it. That is the real problem. That's why.
It's true, man. It's so true. You guys are so pushovers, you know what I mean? Soft. And it's kind of like, the problem is that like cancel culture. So like the left doesn't cancel any of their people. Maybe once or twice as there've been a few, but it's like only if they've been accused of like something sexually, for example, unless you're Bill Clinton, and then it's okay.
Yeah.
But like the right, we cancel any of our people, like the left just points at him and says that guy's a racist, we run him out of town.
Right.
So it's because conservatives, they're afraid of how their image looks, and they want to be, have Christian values. But I mean, you can't let it's like the guy who in World War I, Alvin York, the Medal of Honor winner, he was, a pacifist Christian, but he knew how to kill him some Germans when the time came. And I don't know, like, where the Christian warriors are on the right now that are libertarians or even conservatives, because Jerry Falwell Jr. is not a like holy man, right? But it's kind of like he sort of represents the evangelical right to a degree.
Oh, you know what I mean? I would come back to you as hard as you did to me earlier on that one.
Or Joel Osteen.
My gosh, what a nut.
But I mean, there you go. I mean, these are the most prominent, well-known sort of, like representatives of like fundamentalist, kind of like right-wing evangelical conservatism. I'm trying to be as fair in my terms as I define it here. But I mean, I think that it's very rotten. It's rotten to the core, and that's why it's falling apart. And it's like, it's kind of a shame, because the 80s conservatives who were the moral majority, I didn't agree with them on a lot of that stuff, not being a part of that crew, although I was then at the time, just not fundamentally now. They were fighters. Jerry Falwell was a fighter, again, didn't agree with them on most things, but I recognize a warrior. Ronald Reagan was a warrior. Donald Trump is a warrior. Donald Trump's not, I mean, he's a Christian, right? But I mean,
maybe, I hope.
I mean, because like, I'm not, you can't say, you speak into somebody's heart, just, the Christians are right.
Right. No, you can't make a final judgment.
I can't know.
That's right.
If I were to, but I am a betting man. So if I were to bet, I'd probably bet a certain way. And I'd probably bet a lot of money actually, but
Yeah.
but
My wife would too, by the way. So yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, again, like it's not important. I mean, Donald Trump is, even if he is a Christian, he's certainly not a social conservative. Like he's not watching his language. He's not being nice. He's not, trying to play the, sort of like, father figure, let's everybody get along and blah, blah, blah. No, he is a brawler. He is a boxer, a fighter, and a warrior. Kind of like Reagan was in many ways, even though Reagan was a true social conservative. But social conservatism, I mean, abortion. I agree with social conservatives on abortion.
Right.
So there, you got me there. But what else are social conservatives really advancing today policy-wise? I mean, I know they're outraged about the Netflix film Cuties, but I mean, so am I. I'm outraged about that. You don't have to be religious for that.
No.
My question would be like, how is religious conservatism informing our politics today?
This is so fundamentally a problem. And I'm glad you brought up that Jerry Falwell thing, because the fighter needs to reemerge. And yeah, I'm going to have that internecine discussion with Christians. And I think it's important. And to be candid, biblical values very clearly side with libertarian ideals. You go back to the book of Judges. No, they do. You go back to the book of Well, I had this discussion.
You'll have to fight it out amongst you guys. Cause like for me.
So I had this discussion with Lawrence Reed, who wrote the book on it, Foundation for Economic Education. It is an important discussion because I think that culturally we still have, as you say, we're being negatively affected by people of religious faith who are willing to succumb to socialist ideals. And then they don't even know it sometimes. In fact, they would deny it. And I think that more voices that we have that are willing to, from every perspective, cultural perspective, because I agree with you, social conservatives, what are they about? They're about passing more laws to stop people from doing things that they see as immoral, and that never stops the immorality.
But they're not even doing that anymore. I mean, like, on the social front, weed is becoming more accepted across the country. Like certainly alcohol laws aren't getting more strict. Other social, issues like what, gay marriage. I mean, that's gone. It's over. Right. Right. Well, I guess the biggest fight now is to stop the drag queen story hours
and cuties. And the cuties movie.
Cuties, they could get public support for, but I mean, you're probably not going to stop drag queen story hours. You're just not. You're not going to be able to get a majority of people to vote for something like that in the metropolitan areas where transvestites hang out, and they're going to be reading story hours to kids. And unless you're willing to get a gun and go out and do what you think the government ought to be doing, I don't see the American people getting behind the cause of stopping the drag queen story hours. It makes for great clickbait for our conservative cause. I'm not even saying that I'm not making a moral decision on this either way, by the way. I understand. I wouldn't go to a drag queen story hour with my kids, but it's these cultural battles I think the conservatives are losing to a degree, and where they come back and can offer something substantive to fighting for liberty. That's really where I'm most curious. Like, where are the where were the Christian conservatives who are also like, oh, hey, and by the way, we need free markets, free trade, lower taxes, and all this kind of stuff, right? Like the moral majority, moral minority, whatever they are today, they are embracing themselves progressive forms of economics, like Keynesianism. Like a lot of them have just caved and are just Keynesians. We're all Keynesians now. Or, sufficiently others, prefer Marxism to libertarianism. Like some of these people are so nationalist that they're national socialists. And so it's kind of like, nothing outside the state, I am the state, we are the state, everything is the state. And, the whole purpose of the individual is to serve the collective. And then it's kind of like, all right, great. So, what is society going to devolve back to? This is some kind of like late 1930s scenario where the only two options are, Marxism or communism. If you're in Europe, you better get the hell out and, flee to FDR's America. Hey, great, congratulations, new deal. Congratulations, you thought you were free.
Yeah.
You're only a matter of grief for you.
No, and this fundamentally.
I'm just riffing. I'm just riffing.
No. I think you're right on target. Listen, this goes fundamentally to the entire case for individual liberty, because my big beef with people of religious faith is that you're screwing up your lives so badly. Live the life that you're concerned about. Example it in culture. That's where the, liberty makes a big difference, is the sum total of people making individual decisions. That's the perspective that we lack. And the weakness in Christians has been that they don't want to live out what they say they believe in. They want to make others live out what they say they believe in. But the massive changes that take place in culture that are positive are people living out the values that they know are important, respect for others, living with the other, thinking about other people first. This is why, by the way, I talk about this. That's why I bring up against nice. Niceness, when you define it from the dictionary, is something that's pleasing or likable to me. And I don't say go ahead and be mean, although I want people to be warriors. They should be. But I want them to express kindness, which is thinking of others, whether you agree with them on anything or not, casting out what you believe and what you know to be true in a way that will help others succeed in life. This is the fundamental, in my opinion, the fundamental aspect of libertarianism, of the non-aggression concept, that we're wanting others to be able to succeed, and we're willing to fight for those principles that and constitutional principles in our country that will allow them to succeed, that will take government out of the way, that will take other people out of the way, so that people can make good choices, so that they get the full benefit of the good choices that they make, and they're subject to the full negatives of the bad choices that they make. And it evens out the whole thing. I think this is what we've got to be pressing. And in my internecine fight with Christians, this is what I think they need to be understanding. And so until we get back to this concept in this country, which we once had at least relatively well in the 19th century, maybe, or the early 19th century, then we can have the success that we'd like to see.
Well, Jim, we've talked about the resolve or the lack thereof of resolve amongst our conservative compatriots to fight for a limited government. But, we haven't really gotten to where my iron, strikes the hottest, which is our liberty movement has been defanged. And when I guess defanged would imply that it was done by some outside force. We have defanged ourselves. And weakness is something that can be sensed. Fear is something that can be sensed. A lack of motivation is something that can be sensed. When you're a leader, if you've ever had employees, or if you've ever been responsible for someone for any period of time and for their schedule and what they do, or had to, tell someone what to do, or just, be responsible for another human being. So, something other than a parent, perhaps.
Right.
You can sense when someone is afraid. You can sense when someone fears you. You can sense like crowds, for example. You can sense fear in a crowd. Libertarians struggle with sensing these things and accurately defining these things because, to a large degree, I think our movement is slightly autistic. Which makes us very difficult to read other people's emotions and things like that. So if fear sweeps through a crowd, the libertarian doesn't sense it. Our movement from, starting around 2016 to, maybe around 2012 and on, has really developed a very strong sense of fear and of a strong and a moral cowardice, I think, a cowardice and a weakness, and a desire for libertarianism to become a sort of a self-help mantra, a path to a better lifestyle individually, rather than a set of policy understandings of what is good government. right? Like a libertarian lifestyle and things like that. I'm guilty of like talking about things like that, considerations, understanding that I can be hypocrite in many ways. I don't.
Well, and by the way, there's an aspect of it personally.
I'm not blind. Yeah, I'm not blind to that, but it's mostly a set of policy prescriptions based on government, not necessarily how you live your life, morally or personally as a your family unit or things like that. It doesn't get that deep into it. It's just limited government.
In fact, those are secondary outcomes of whatever we do in policy. Yes.
Correct. But there is a moral weakness amongst libertarians, or I think probably, and I know that there's people say this is sour grapes, but I mean, I think Gary Johnson personified that to a degree, whereas I saw that like, there's this sort of narcissistic kind of like looking down your nose at people kind of a thing that we libertarians do. I know better than you. And it becomes this unwillingness to engage and maybe like a lack of humility to a degree. And also just like a lack of self-esteem, where it's like many of the people that I, met campaigning who were not supporters of myself didn't have the kind of fundamental resolve. They may have had numbers, but they didn't have the kind of zeal or resolve or willingness to be like dedicated and committed to accomplishing a goal, rather than sort of like accomplishing something for their own like mental well-being or mental health, right? I'm not sure if there was just a lot of insecurity. I think there was definitely a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of insecurity. And so, we're sort of shooting blanks in the sense that we have this generation of people who I think many of them have bought into leftist talking points, simply because they've been unable or unwilling to do the hard work of, reading the literature of our actual true enemies, the Marxists, socialists, Leninists, communists, or, to spend a little bit of time, trying to figure out how Soviet Russia became Soviet Russia and how these ideas blossomed over the last 150 years. They just don't want to be seen as racist. They're weak because they're weak. They don't want their liberal friends to call them racist, because there are these libertarians, a lot of young white people, and these young white people who live in these urban cores, many of them will virtue signal to the left because 1, they want to keep their jobs, 2, they're cowards, 3, they are terrified of being called a racist, and anything that opposes a leftist, worldview now is racist. If you don't support Black Lives Matter, then you're a racist. If you don't support this, you're a racist or a sexist or a bigot or a misogynist or homophobe, anti-Semite, what have you, right? So like, and that exists in, many fundamental forms. But the cowardice of the liberty movement is, to me, is our fatal flaw. There were a lot of people who got involved in campaigns and thought, I need to run for, I need to get involved in presidential politics because I need mental help, and I'm going to use this as some kind of strange therapeutic thing to make myself feel better. I'm going to find the candidate who makes me feel good about myself, rather than the candidate who's going to put put some full plate armor on you and give you a broadsword and say, let's go kill some English. You know what I mean? Like, let's get our kilts on and, we've got a battle to fight, because politics isn't nice. And too many libertarians want to play nice, and they've got a knife to their throat and their backs to their walls, and they're peeing their pants, and they're saying, well, at least they're not calling me a racist.
Listen, I have said in all the political campaigns that I've run, various efforts that I take on legislatively, whatever I've been doing, I really do take up the whole Patton thing. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. I think in the political arena, where ideals and ideas need to be advanced, you have to be willing to take up that battle, because one of my big problems with the Libertarian Party, and there are so many good people connected to it that I have a great affinity for, and I appreciate them, and I Justin Amash I consider a friend, and I appreciate what he's been trying to do and hoping to achieve. But the party itself, that Libertarian Party itself, one of the reasons I could never quite get in there is goes back to this thing of my individual lifestyle and what I love, and thinking it's about all that. I've always felt that, and they don't say this particularly, but in practice, it's almost like if we make drugs and prostitution legal, we're all going to be free. Now, you can have arguments about that, but my concern is it's so much bigger than that. Of course, the drug war has been a disaster in this country. So that's a really big issue. I'm not saying, I don't want to, delegitimize that argument. I think I live here in Colorado, and I see no negative effects of marijuana legalization of any substantive amount. I'm sure there may be this or that thing, but
they're saying youth car crashes have never been higher
oh
in
my
Colorado.
gosh. I got to tell you, so my Christian conservative friends in this state drive me nuts trying to do that. It's like, one, I look at your study and I'm not even sure that what you're saying is accurate, but let's just accept that it's accurate. You're talking about a tiny tick that will be all figured out over the long run because people are going to make decisions. But seriously, if everything is about the drugs, then we've missed all these other things that are fundamentally necessary for our achievement as a country, for our freedom as a country, that we're not willing also to focus on. Does that resonate with you? Do you agree with me on that?
I think so. Yes, it does. We kind of fail to look at the bigger picture sometimes as libertarians, and we also don't celebrate our small victories enough, I think, because the fact that marijuana is legalized to the degree that it has, 10 years ago, honestly, when I first got involved in politics, I would have been shocked and amazed to hear that my home state of Missouri had done this. Right. But, and it's like with people who have looked at me recently and said, Austin, you're a sellout traitor because you said you're thinking about voting for Donald Trump. You sellout traitor. And I'm kind of like, well, I'm looking at the bigger picture here. And I'm saying to myself, okay, well, and I even asked Matt Welch this morning from Reason Magazine. I was like,
I heard it, by the way. It was a good conversation.
Yeah. I was like, hasn't Trump done some libertarian stuff? And he had to grudgingly admit he has.
Yeah.
And then I asked him flat out, what has Biden done that's libertarian? And you know what he said? Nothing.
Right.
Despite that fact, Jim, he didn't, and I'm sure Matt didn't like admitting that either, but despite that fact, Matt said that in this poll that we were talking about, that like 70% of the libertarians who voted for Gary Johnson are thinking of voting for Joe Biden. And I'm just like, can you not look at the bigger picture? No, it really is sometimes, I feel like, a lot of just spite. And it's kind of like, my mother used to tell me when I was a young man, and I was very spiteful. I was a spiteful young man. And she just said to me, Austin, she said, you would cut off your nose to spite your face. And I remember I was like, I don't even know what that means, but I'm going to act arrogant. You know what I mean? I may be ignorant, but I can still be arrogant. And sometimes I get that impression from my colleagues.
Well, and by the way, talk about little victories. I mean, what an amazing victory that we finally got a president that says we got to stop the war machine. Now, I'm all for it is a constitutional effort of government to have a military, but the way we do it and the way that we've allowed so many presidents to just send people off to war for a combination of meeting the needs of the lobbyists of the military industrial complex, as well as trying to achieve some political goal that kills and maims men and women. It's crazy. And then we finally got a guy that's willing to do it. And so we're going to say, yeah, but he does too many executive orders and the debt is increasing. He keeps signing these bills, which are horrible. I'm in disagreement with all of those, but
absolutely.
We can't. Yeah.
Well, and it's like, a guy that I know, you should have him on your show. He's great. His name's Dave Smith. He's got a Part of the Problem podcast, and he did this debate with this Andy Craig character. And Andy Craig is like everything that I've described to you about, like the weak, sort of ineffectual, like needs self-help libertarian, got involved in politics type. And Dave is a warrior. And Dave said when he was debating with Andy, he was talking about God, I wish I could say this as well as he did, but like with a lot of the liberty movement people who get in the liberty movement and want to get involved in politics, they can't be in charge of anything anywhere else. So they get involved with something that, as an social outcast, they feel they can be a part of and sort of rule the little kingdom. While people who are really trying to get something done and like go out there and fight for these principles, who don't need self-help or therapy or what have you, right? Like or don't need to come to some self-actualization, like can go out there and kick ass for our cause. But like when it comes to Donald Trump, for example, like if you can't acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump doing some libertarian stuff is objectively better than Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton
or George Bush,
yeah, you're not a serious person. So it's kind of like, well, here's how Dave Smith said this. He says, when it comes to war, that's what he was talking about. Now I remember. He says, Andy Craig is the type who says we need to Black Lives Matter, bends the knee at the game. We need to virtue signal to the left, and we need to ensure that they don't think that we're racist, because for God's sake, the last thing we ever want to do is think that, somebody, is whistling Dixie and hangs out with us. But what Dave Smith said is that, while I don't necessarily agree or condone with racist opinions, he's like, you cannot tell me, he's like, you supported Andy Craig, you supported Bill Weld, who supported the Iraq war, who was a warmonger, who advocated for all these interventions. He's like, please forgive me if I think that the people who advocated for war are worse than somebody's uncle who watches Fox News all day, who says politically incorrect things, right? So like the priorities are so out of whack with these people who have what I would call Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Their priorities are out of whack, because Bill Weld is fine because he's respectable, right? And he would go with Mitt Romney, and he would go with Joe Jorgensen. He would go to the Black Lives Matter movement, and he would light the candle, and he would take a knee, and he would be fine with all that kind of stuff. But and that's fine. That's okay with the left libertarians and with the self-help libertarians. That's okay. But as long as you're respectable like Bill Weld, as long as you virtue signal on the left, but if they supported war, that's okay. But if they had an uncle who watches too much Fox News or says politically incorrect things, those are the people we got to run out. Donald Trump is the devil because he says politically incorrect things. No, I'm sorry, but I see people like Mitt Romney as worse than Donald Trump.
Oh my gosh. And George W. Bush. I mean, listen, the corruptness of the George W. Bush administration that so many people of the in conservative stripes just lauded and praised, and yet he lied about going into a war. I mean, do you find that a valuable characteristic in a person, to say that this policy of preemption, okay, so now what we're going to do on the world stage is anytime we're afraid of somebody or we don't like them or we think they're going to do us harm, we're just going to go destroy them rather than building what we have here and allowing individuals to do that? I mean, it's fundamentally crazy the way people think. And you point that out well. I think it's, and libertarians, my frustration with so many libertarians is exactly as you described it. They are willing to compromise major things for some tiny little thing that honestly doesn't advance freedom in the least.
No, they just, again, they're terrified. They are moral cowards, because to them, the most important thing is whatever is that we don't want the left to think that we're racists, to call you racist, because if we ever did sit down and read Thomas Sowell and what he had to say about leftist blacks, here's the thing, like a lot of these left libertarians, if you were to take Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams completely out of context, and what they say about problems that minorities are facing here in the United States, if you read those out of context quotes or said them as if they were your own in front of these left libertarians, they'd say you're a racist, or the left
right.
the left would call you a racist.
Yeah.
But then in context, when you know who it was and how I said it, they would feel very embarrassed. And trust me, I've embarrassed more than a few people doing things like that. And that is the problem. There's a weakness on their part, because they've outsourced their thinking to a community. They've outsourced their ability to think for themselves and to critically analyze problems that we face, and to really be willing to sort of get in the mire. I've got blood on my face, dude. You know what I mean? I've been the man in the arena, and I've had the peanuts thrown at me from the gallery. Right. And, quite frankly, it can be annoying. And sometimes, that little bit of arrogance that I have is, hopefully coupled no longer with the, spite. But I definitely feel sometimes like a level of frustration, especially when I see that it's kind of like our movement is on the retreat. Well, you were in a recession politically speaking right now. And it's, the only way to change that is not to do more of what we've been doing. You have to change your tactics.
Well, by the way, supporting Donald Trump for his willingness to extract us from war, to call out the war machine as he did just a few days prior to this. Yeah.
Just to do that.
And then we can encourage him to go forward more with this. I mean, in other words, when you support that as libertarians and be honest about the disagreements, I'm not saying now it's just chuck the disagreements, but just encourage this.
I want it now, Daddy. I want it now. I want it all now. No. I get it. I feel that same thing. I've got a little Veruca salt in me. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, really.
I do. I absolutely. I want it all now. But I'm not going to get it all now. They're not going to get it all now. Demand it all if you want right now. You got two options. You got the ballot box or the cartridge box. And quite frankly, these puny little weaklings, they sure as hell are not going to be leading any cartridge box battles anytime soon. That's for sure.
No, that's true. And by the way, so therefore, I've been trudging in it for years and you decided to start trudging in it again. Why the heck did you become a Republican?
My supporters urged me to, and that was a large part of it. I did it the old fashioned way. I made over 3,000 phone calls from my own personal cell phone directly to the people who had donated to my presidential campaign. And keep in mind, that was a majority Libertarian Party people.
Oh, yeah.
Those people, 99% of those people said, go Republican and run for Senate. And those are the people who are number one would donate to me because they're the only people who've shown like any real sincere loyalty. I mean, there have been people who, there are people who campaign for you or volunteer for you, but they never donate, but that's fine. Cause you just appreciate their time and energy, of course. But the people who donated, those are the people whose the campaign belongs to them. Remember?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about you, but I mean, like those people, like they have kind of like ownership stake of it too. It wasn't like I was getting funded by like, Merck or freaking, like the big corporations weren't funding me. They were funding my
big
opponents.
pharma, big military industrial complex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, so, I wanted their input and I thought that was important. And, Missouri is a red state, Republican state. I feel like people think we needed a win. Missouri, you don't have to like register. So, I mean, like you don't like technically have to be any party. You can vote. We have an open primary here, which is kind of nice. Right. But I think foundationally that the Libertarian Party, like they're in the wilderness now and they're going to have to like, it's like Moses, they've been in the wilderness for like 3 or 4 or 5 years now. And they need to like, spend another 25, 30 years back out in the wilderness until, you get a chance at the promised land. But as for now, like, good luck foraging, Israelites.
I was really rooting for you in your presidential bid because, to be candid, for the years that I was on KLZ in Denver on the radio, the folks there wanted me to have Gary Johnson on, and Gary's a nice guy and whatever. I didn't find him honest to be a real libertarian. I think fundamentally because of what we've talked about earlier. And you were actually out there. I mean, probably since Harry Brown, Joe Jorgensen seems pretty decent from a libertarian perspective, but since Harry Brown up to her, it's like the Libertarian Party doesn't even put up libertarians. And yet in the Republican Party, you can get people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and Justin Amash and some others, even though Justin left the party, but you can get these people nowadays starting to move the needle a little bit when you get down to business, even in Washington, D.C. I mean, Rand's got a pretty huge voice. He's not dominating the legislative outcomes yet. That's far from it.
He used to a large degree, but a lot of it had to do with just timing. You know what I mean? Like Matt Welch's interview with me this morning, he were talking about like the appetite for third parties and how it's cyclical. And that's just something we have to acknowledge. And so a lot of this like non-interest in Jo Jorgen isn't necessarily because, she's not fundamentally that interesting. I'm sure she is. But I mean, the context, a libertarian in 2020 has to be something quite unique to be contextually appropriate. For example, if like the, central focus of the Libertarian candidate was to fight for the people who were locked down and, couldn't go to church, and people who were getting forced mask mandates in schools, and kind of made themselves a coronavirus warrior of freedom kind of deal. Like, that would probably be something that's culturally relevant this year, right?
Right.
You can't be everything to everybody. You just can't. You need a gimmick. It's a damn shame, but that's just reality. Maybe if there was a reality show featuring the Libertarian Party presidential candidate this year, also airing on TBS, there might be a chance to get what they got last time. But again, not a force that's under Joe's control. And I mean, the Libertarian Party just didn't have a lot of good slate of candidates this year. And, quite frankly, I just feel like, people are like, oh, well, why didn't you run again? And I'm just like, well, first of all, I'm happy right now, and I like my life a lot, and that's a sacrifice. And also, it's just not a good time for a libertarian voice this year. People, sadly, are in a pandemic year and an electoral year, very authoritarian, I feel, and we're getting squeezed out by the culture, which is to a degree out of our hands. We're responsible for a lot of what's going on in our movement, but also outside forces are just bigger and stronger, and it's tyranny is on the tide, my man.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not sure where the island is that we can kind of shore up, and right now we're like Taiwan, government in exile.
Yeah. Well, so I know that on my end, what I'm trying to encourage people to understand is you have to engage in the fight. That's why I call this against nice. Stop being so freaking nice. Don't be a jerk. Okay. Be kind. Think of others. But it's like I say,
assertive.
Assertive. Well, here's how I put it together.
What you want. Just ask for what you want. If you don't ask, you're never going to get it.
And go grab it a little bit too. I mean, that's really fundamentally part of what liberty's about. So it's like we would never consider a parent kind who didn't discipline their children, and no child being disciplined thinks it's very nice.
But but disciplining your child is a violation of the non-aggression principle. Therefore, you must, when your child goes to grab something, you must retreat and surrender and allow them to.
By the way, I'm not talking about corporal punishment. I'm talking about.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just
really.
Joking.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Sorry. I missed that. I should catch these jokes. I don't know where I'm getting at.
It was a joke. Yeah. My bad.
The worst. No, but this is where this is fundamentally the paradigm that we have to change. If we're going to believe in liberty and assert the principles of liberty, we're going to have to go out and grab them. That will require political effort. It requires speaking into the culture as well, too. It requires a personal life that actually lives that principle out as well. And so if we're not going to do that, then we are going to ultimately lose the country. I mean, we could be near the precipice right now if a Biden administration comes in, and then we're going to have a different battle that we're going to have to fight. So my great concern for people in this movement, and I'm going to speak to it with Christians too, because I do believe those principles are fundamentally there. Andrew Breitbart told me one time we were talking, he's like, hey, I love Christians because the Judeo-Christian ethic, I think, advanced the ideas of liberty, and they are fundamentally there. We can have that argument sometime, but you can listen to what I do.
It depends on the denomination.
Well, we'll have that discussion sometime more because it's more fundamental than that. But I don't want to.
I always like to drop a bomb before I leave.
Dude, I think listen, but you and I are on the same page on this. We've got to assert these principles because they matter. They don't just matter in the political game, and they have to be played out there. I'm not saying that that's not there, but that's not only where they matter. They matter because human life depends on liberty. And we've had so little of it in human history. And finally, we get a taste of it in the United States, and it filters around very few other places, sadly, but some other places. And it's time to do that because it is valuable. We are the last best hope, as Ronald Reagan said, for that kind of freedom. So if we're not willing to fight for it here, might as well just throw in the towel. I think your criticism of libertarians in that regard is very useful. So we're gonna keep doing that battle. I got to ask you this question though before we finish the podcast here.
Okay.
Are you voting for Trump or not?
I am open to the possibility. It's more than 50% chance now. More than 50%. Here's the thing. I'm watching for Aleppo moments. I'm looking for, power grabs. I'm watching what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are saying. I'm just going to, until I get up there into that voting booth, I am going to hold it open, because you know what? Here's my final secret.
Yeah.
If you're not committed, your vote has power. People that because
Right.
then the politician has to listen to you when you have a concern. I'm a concerned voter, undecided, and I'd like to ask you a question, and then they have to answer your question, and
Yeah.
then you have some leverage. Consider voting for any of the candidates, and then if you have a question for any of the candidates, they don't assume. I mean, you can be a mindless partisan, and that's fine. I'm on team this or team
Right.
that, and if you're getting paid to say it, far be it from me to criticize how you make your dinner. But no. I think that again, these little subtle things, like to advance you, politically, and to advance your ideas, be a little open, right, to who you might vote for. And I'm not saying that like I'm just a little open. I'm definitely leaning towards Donald Trump, but I'm gonna make up my mind that day.
I think if what your point's well taken, because if we're not going to be critical of the continual massive debt that we are putting this country into, massive encroachment upon our liberties, and we're not going to hold even Donald Trump accountable to that, we're not going to advance anything. But on the hard part of that, as I said earlier, is that we're also pulling back the military. We're calling them to account in the way that we approach this whole idea of war, and I really feel good about that. This is the toughest thing that I think anyone who thinks about the principles of liberty has. But I think we've got to recognize that, we've got to take the victories that we have. If we're not willing to do that, then we might as well throw in the towel. I love Matt Welsh. I know him too. I think he's an awesome guy. But there's sometimes, even with him, I sit back and say, and then he won't come on my podcast now because I said this. But there are just times that I think that he and some folks over at Reason, who are doing fantastic work for all of us, by the way, it's a fantastic organization that everyone should connect to. But they just kind of throw in the towel a little bit every once in a while. And I just want them to maintain the aggressiveness that they have, and others like them, and recognize where we can win. We do not take every victory that is there for us. And it frustrates me a lot.
Agreed.
Well, you're a good man, Austin Peterson. I appreciate you dealing with this theist, Christian libertarian that's so hard to.
Sure. And I figured because you're a Christian libertarian, you'd have a sense of humor, and so I knew I could actually wind you up and tease you about it a little bit, and also kind of challenge you. Like my thing is that I do think that the religious question is going to be a bigger and bigger one, but like you're going to have these internecine squabbles with your denominations over who's more really whose opinion wins the day on whether Jesus is a socialist or a capitalist or what have you at the end of the day. But the bigger picture is what I think conservatives like Rush are rightly recognizing, which is that more and more people are fundamentally rejecting religion as a whole, and we should probably start having a conversation about what that means for our liberties as a whole. And there is sort of an acceptance at some point where it's kind of like, hey, now we're a minority, and how are these terms going to get dictated? We might want to set ourselves up for more liberty down the road if we are no longer in the majority. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the ideals.
I'm concerned about that, and I want to work with Christians. I want to work with Christians to have a freer future, because I fear the statist atheists and what they want to do to our rights, if they get power.
No, listen, you and I need to always work together on that. I'm telling you that most of the great proponents, 18th century and back, of liberty had a theist perspective, and that has been lost there. And it's a powerful force. We need a new not moral majority, but I mean, we need a movement like that goes to liberty, because it also can be a powerful force. And I think the principles are there, but more fundamentally,
what we don't want to do is have the church, a baby with a bathwater, right? So like,
right.
There are, in the Christian traditions, there are some traditions are more libertarian than others. Mormons are a very good example of that. I like Mormons a lot. And it's because of they talk the talk, but they also walk the walk. And I think probably a lot of people reject religion just because of the rampant hypocrisy that they see amongst so many denominations. Not to say that it's not within the well, I guess they don't call them Mormons anymore, right? Latter-day Saints,
right,
if I'm
right.
being technically correct.
Right.
So I mean, like, there are more libertarian traditions, and like, we need to suss these things out. And I would love to discuss that for another probably hour and a half, but I'm already losing my voice. So
no worries.
I gotta run.
We will definitely do that. Austin Peterson, I'm just grateful to you for joining us on the podcast, and good luck in what you're doing. And whenever we can be a help with what you're doing, let us know.
Thanks so much, Jim. Have a good one. It was good to meet you.
You too. Thanks, Austin. Thank you for joining us today on the Against Nice podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. You can sign up for our email list there, just at the top right of the web page. And make sure to follow us on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or even the iHeartRadio app. And give us a 5-star rating and let people know what you think about our podcast. Again, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. Join our email list at the top right hand of the page there, and follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. Thanks for joining the show today. We'll be back soon.